Welcome back, folks. We're living in a time where the communists aren't even pretending anymore. They want to regulate you out of your own home and have you sipping soup through soggy paper straws like it's some kind of eco-friendly gulag. This is freedom, with a permission slip stapled to a stack of bureaucratic nonsense. And nowhere is this madness more perfectly staged than in California, the progressive petri dish where the left screams about authoritarianism while smothering you in so much red tape you think you wandered into a Home Depot for government overreach. Today, we're breaking down a moment that's almost too on the nose. Maher, of all people, grilling Gavin Newsom about the endless maze of useless regulations. When Maher's the voice of reason, it's safe to say the system has officially face-planted. Let's dig in.
You're governor, you're running for president. Where do you get... But let's talk about what's important. My roof.
Your roof.
My roof.
Is this the solar? Is this, we're back to the solar?
After the fire.
It's always about the solar.
After the fire,
yes, Bill.
New roof, they suggested, get the stuff that's not, okay. 2 inspections I needed to have. Why? It's my roof. If it falls on my head, that's my problem.
That's it?
That's it.
That's just a statement.
No, that's my question. Why do I need 2 inspections, which I have to pay for?
Yeah.
You were here last time. We talked about regulations. You said, oh, it's a completely new day.
Well, no, wait.
That's a quote from you. Completely new day.
Well, I mean,
you said you were working on it.
By the way, and last week you had Ezra Klein on, which was incredibly important. He wrote a book called Abundance, which really lays out a very condemning picture of liberal governance in this country and the fact that we are process-focused and not outcome-focused. And your demonstrable example of that is relates to what you've tried to do with your damn roof for the last 15 years. And so it's our job to eliminate as many of those thickets
How's that going, though?
as possible. It's sincere. Well, I'll tell you this. When we have on a serious note, when we have an emergency mindset, it goes extraordinarily well. I'll give you 2 examples. You had Josh Shapiro on recently talking about the I-95. We had the I-10 here, which we were able to get back on track and cars back on that I-10 within 8 days.
After the fire.
After the fire, but we were able to do it in 8 days. And that otherwise would not have occurred. It have been months and months and months of process in a traditional environment. The same thing with the recovery as it relates to debris removal. The first phase of debris removal in Los Angeles was done in less than a month.
Let's break down this little kabuki theater of nonsense we just witnessed, because what you're looking at here isn't just a casual conversation about building codes. It's a masterclass in political deflection, empty rhetoric, and the left's favorite pastime, defending the indefensible. Now, first, Maher lobs a softball of common sense. He's complaining that he needed 2 separate inspections to fix his roof, not build a nuclear reactor, a roof on his own house. And Maher's point couldn't be clearer. If it collapses, it's his problem. Personal responsibility, basic freedom. Remember those? But the moment Maher applies that logic to California's bureaucratic nightmare, Gavin Newsom freezes like a deer in headlights. Instead of addressing the obvious overreach, he dodges, stammers, and pretends he can't comprehend why endless inspections might be a problem for the average person trying to live their life without Big Brother breathing down their neck. So Newsom immediately dodges the question, saying, "That's it?" As if he's shocked that Maher isn't bringing him some grand policy thesis, but rather pointing out the absurd micromanagement of private life that defines California. It's a classic dismissive framing tactic, minimizing the issue so you don't have to answer for it. Instead of addressing the fact that everyday Californians are buried under layers of pointless red tape, Newsom acts like Maher's complaint is beneath him. Then comes the cherry on top. Newsom tries to change the subject entirely by rambling about how when they have an emergency mindset, things actually get done. He name drops the I-10 freeway reopening and debris removal after the LA fires like he's running a FEMA highlight reel. But here's the trick. This is a clear false equivalence. This has nothing to do with what Maher is talking about, because Maher isn't talking about disasters or emergency responses. He's talking about the day-to-day, grinding, relentless overregulation that chokes private citizens and small businesses every single day in California. Newsom's examples don't address the problem. They're a smokescreen to avoid accountability for the bureaucracy he oversees the 99% of the time. And let's talk about this absurd flex that when we have an emergency, we can move fast. Well, congratulations, Gavin. You're admitting that the government can cut the red tape and get things done when it wants to. In fact, though, that's an easy fact check, and we'll get to that later. Anyway, why exactly can't the same efficiency that Gavin is implying apply to something as simple as fixing a roof? Why does it take wildfires, supposedly, and collapsed highways to get you off your hands, Gavin? And Maher, who, let's be honest, still votes blue no matter who, drops the cutting line at the end saying, how's that going? Because Newsom has been promising deregulation for years. In 2019, he literally declared it's a new day in California when he signed an executive order to streamline housing development. Fast forward to today, nothing's changed, except maybe the cost of living, which keeps skyrocketing while your roof inspection costs double. This entire exchange is a perfect snapshot of how progressives in power operate. They regulate you into oblivion, shrug when you complain, and then pat themselves on the back when they momentarily stop lighting the house on fire long enough to fix one broken window. At the end of the day, the problem isn't the inspections, it's the mindset. A government so obsessed with process over outcome, so drunk on its own paperwork that even basic personal freedom is treated like a privilege you have to beg for. And Newsom's smug, dismissive answers are the clearest evidence yet that the left's idea of progress is just a permission slip stapled to a mountain of forms you'll never be done filling out.
The question is, how do you apply that in between emergencies? How do you do that as it relates to a standard of governance that people should expect and taxpayers should expect? So I couldn't agree more with Ezra. It's an indictment of liberal governance and leadership. And he attacks California rightfully in many categories and respects, the high-speed rail, as it relates to housing production, and we own that. But we also own the response. 42 secret reform bills I passed. There's 20 bills we're working on right now. We're trying to address the issue that is the issue that dominates, and that's localism. And the issue you describe is local inspectors that the state can't control, but we have to.
Yeah. There is no question about it, folks. What we just witnessed was a masterclass in bureaucratic babble straight out of the Kamala Harris school of saying nothing for 2 minutes. Gavin Newsom was asked a simple, clear question. Why is California so buried in useless regulations that you need 2 inspections just to fix your own roof? And instead of answering, he delivered a smokescreen of jargon, half-baked self-awareness, and empty name-dropping. Newsom attempted to preempt criticism by agreeing with it. Classic political deflection. He says, it's an indictment of liberal governance and leadership. Oh, how brave. He wants credit for acknowledging the problem while doing absolutely nothing to solve it. This man has been in the governor's office for well over a decade. He was the lieutenant governor, and now he's been a 2-term governor, and yet nothing. All he gives us is the rhetorical equivalent of an arsonist saying, yeah, fires are bad, while still holding the gas can. Then he throws in a drive-by reference to Ezra Klein, as if repeating a journalist's critique absolves him of responsibility. It's like he thinks pointing out his own failures makes him seem less of a failure. Spoiler alert, Gavin, self-awareness is not the same as competence. You don't get to claim merit over just claiming the criticism. Like, why aren't you doing anything about it? Anyway, next comes the meat of the con job, or rather the tofu of it, because there's no substance. Newsom brags about passing 42 secret reform bills and working on 20 more. Secret reform? What does that even mean? If you're passing reforms in secret, that's not transparency. That's straight up political theater. And notice how he never explains what these bills actually do. No examples, no measurable outcomes. There's a big number tossed out like a magician trying to distract you with fireworks while he picks your pocket. This is shadow government at its finest. But here's the real kicker. In the sleight of hand he hopes you don't catch. He tries to blame the entire regulatory mess on local inspectors, saying that's localism. The state can't control it. That's flat out a dodge. California's Byzantine regulatory structure is not some rogue operation by local municipalities. It's enabled, mandated, and enforced by state law. The local inspectors follow the state's rule book. They don't make the rules, they enforce the rules Newsom's party put in place over decades of progressive micromanagement. And the cherry on top, he throws out the phrase, we own that. No, Gavin, you don't own it. You preside over it. You excuse it. You perpetuate it and actively execute it every single day. Owning it would mean tearing it down and fixing it, not offering up a word salad to dodge accountability. This is a textbook case of what George Orwell called political language designed to make lies sound truthful and to give an appearance of solidity to pure wind. Newsom is trying to make you believe that endless layers of red tape, spiraling housing costs, stalled infrastructure, and a state that's bleeding residents faster than you can count them is actually under control because he passed passed some vague reforms you've never heard of. So let's cut through the fluff. California's regulatory bloat is not an accident. It's a direct product of the very style of leadership Newsom embodies. Process over outcome, bureaucracy over freedom, virtue signaling over actual governance. And no amount of fast talking, bill counting, or Ezra Klein name dropping can hide that.
I see today the Trump administration they talked about, I don't know if this is true, but they talked about the fact that California had a rule that schools cannot be required to notify parents if their kids in school have changed their gender, their pronouns. That's the kind of thing, even though it doesn't affect a lot of people, that makes a lot of people go, well, you know what? That's the party without common sense. Now, if that's your state, how are you? Well,
I just disagree with that. I mean, the law was you would be fired. A teacher would be fired if a teacher did not report or snitch on a kid talking about their gender identity. I just think that was wrong. I think teachers should teach. I don't think they should be required to turn in kids. And by the way,
we're talking about their parents. How can you snitch? The idea of a snitch and a parent to me doesn't compute.
Well, I don't. But what is the job of a teacher? It's to teach. If Johnny's talking about some identity issue or some issue about liking someone of the same sex, is the teacher's job to then report that? By the way, in this law, the teacher can still do that, but they can't be fired if that's it can't be fired if that's not what they do. And that's something I think I just think that was fair.
Let's rip this one apart, because what we're witnessing here is Gavin Newsom performing intellectual gymnastics so sloppy it would get him disqualified from a middle school debate team. Now, first off, Newsom's entire defense here is a straw man argument wrapped in a victim narrative. Bill Maher rightly points out that California, under Newsom's leadership, has pushed policies preventing schools from notifying parents when their child changes their gender identity or pronouns at school. That's a fact. And Maher's criticism is clear. How does it make sense that parents, the legal guardians and caretakers of minors, are being deliberately cut out of a crucial piece of information about their own children? But instead of addressing that question, Newsom rewrites the entire issue. He spins it as some dystopian fantasy about teachers being required to snitch on kids, as if parents are the Gestapo and schools are hiding kids in the attic. He even uses the word snitch, which is deliberate, manipulative language meant to frame concerned parents as villains and school bureaucrats as heroes standing between vulnerable children and their own families. It's a rhetorical sleight of hand, reframing parental rights as authoritarian overreach and recasting state interference as protection. And here's the thing, this isn't about kids being turned into the police. This is about whether parents have a right to know what's going on with their child, particularly when it involves life-altering decisions about gender identity that could lead to social, medical, or psychological consequences. Newsom deliberately avoids that reality and instead paints teachers as victims of some imaginary law where they'd be fired for not outing students. That law doesn't exist. What California has done is create policies that actively prevent schools from informing parents, even when students are socially transitioning without parental knowledge. That's not protecting anyone. That's inserting the state between parents and their own children and calling it compassion. And let's not gloss over the double standard here. Newsom is suddenly a champion of teachers should teach. Yeah, this is the same governor who's fine with teachers lecturing kindergartners about gender theory and identity politics, but draws a line at a teacher simply notifying a parent that their child is struggling with something fundamental about who they are. You can't have it both ways, Gavin. You can't weaponize schools to push social ideology and then pretend teachers are neutral observers when it comes to parental rights. Even worse, Newsom tries to gaslight the audience by saying, by the way, in this law, the teacher can still do that, but they can't be fired if that's not what they do. That was my best Newsom impression. Did I nail the sliminess? Hopefully. Anyway, everything Gavin said is meaningless because the core problem isn't whether teachers get fired. It's that the state is telling schools to keep secrets from parents. He's avoiding the question entirely. Now, this is a textbook equivocation, deliberately conflating two things that are not the same. Reporting to law enforcement is not the same as informing parents. Protecting a child from abuse is not the same as cutting parents out of their child's development altogether. But Newsom wants you to think it's all the same, that anyone asking for basic parental involvement is some authoritarian monster trying to snitch on kids. And let's not forget the political cowardice here. Newsom used to posture himself as a progressive champion of all social ideology, but now, when polling shows that parents across the country are fed up with being sidelined in their own children's lives, suddenly he's pivoting to, I don't think teachers should be required to turn in kids. It's an act. It's deliberate. He's trying to appear more moderate so he can run for president. It's a desperate, hollow attempt to thread the needle between appeasing the far left base and not alienating the moderate voters he'll need when he runs for president. The truth is simple. California's policy is anti-parent, anti-family, and arrogantly assumes that the state knows better than the people raising their children. And Newsom's rhetorical tap dance here is nothing more than an attempt to distract from the fact by pretending he's the one protecting kids, when what he's really protecting is his state's control over your family. And here's where the real, almost comical irony comes in, and it's why Newsom's entire argument collapses under its own weight. The same teachers and unions who are now protected from informing parents about a child's gender identity are the exact ones who've been actively promoting LGBT narratives in the classroom for years. You don't have to look far. Scroll TikTok for 5 minutes and you'll find teachers proudly waving pride flags, decorating their classrooms like a drag brunch, and bragging about introducing gender ideology to kids as young as 5. So let's connect the dots. The conversation about gender isn't starting at home. It's starting in the classroom. And now under this policy, the same teachers fostering these conversations are being shielded from any obligation to loop in the parents. That's not accidental. It's a self-feeding ideological loop designed to separate children from their parents' influence and funnel them straight into the social contagion of gender and sexuality politics, with the state and teachers' unions acting as gatekeepers. It's not about protecting kids. It's about installing a pipeline of influence that conveniently cuts out parents who might disagree. This isn't grassroots activism. It's top-down social engineering, and the Democrat Party's compliance with it is nothing more than bowing to the demands of the LGBT political lobby at the expense of parental rights, transparency, and common sense. This has to end.
You mentioned the high-speed. I'm sure you're tired of talking about the high-speed rail, but it was passed in 2000. In 2019, you said, let's be real, the current project as planned would cost too much, respectfully take too long. Right now, there simply isn't a path to get from Sacramento to San Diego. Well, there's a path. It's the highway. Let alone from San Francisco to L.A. I wish there were. However, we do have the capacity to complete a high-speed rail link from Merced to Bakersfield. I know you're the governor of everyone in the state, and those are... Can you name 3 people who ever wanted to go from Merced to Bakersfield? I mean, I feel like... I'm just saying, it's like...
Let me challenge the premise, because I think in many respects this goes to, I think, the state of the Democratic Party. And I mean this with respect. The Central Valley in California is one of the fastest growing parts of the state. It's predominantly rural, yes. It's predominantly Republican, yes. But it's an incredibly important part of the state. And I think we, at our own peril, we talk down to people in the Central Valley. And I think a lot of people extend that as part of the problem with the Democratic brand. We talk down to people, we talk past people. I think it's an incredibly important part of the state, not just because I represent the state. By the way, that part of the state, probably the largest share of my recall vote. So I'm not saying that in the context of a political frame, but I am saying it in the context of trying to meet people where they are and respect people. All of us want to be protected. We want to be respected. We want to be connected. And I think they have a right to have this kind of investment as much as the coast.
I really wasn't attacking those people, but good turn.
But I think it's a...
Let's talk about one of the greatest political magic tricks you'll ever see. Gavin Newsom somehow managing to dodge accountability for one of the biggest infrastructure scams in American history while simultaneously lecturing the people he failed. And on top of it, Bill Maher, who started by criticizing him, ends up complimenting the guy for how slickly he weaseled out of the question. You couldn't script a more brain-dead Democrat moment if you tried. Now, first off, let's get to the meat of the exchange. Maher points out the obvious. California's high-speed rail project is a boondoggle. Voters approved it back in 2008 under the promise that you'd be able to travel from San Francisco to Los Angeles in under 3 hours for a reasonable price. Fast forward over 15 years, and tens of billions of taxpayer dollars later, there's no train from San Francisco to LA, no train from Sacramento to San Diego. What do we have? A proposed line between Merced and Bakersfield. In other words, a train to nowhere. Now, instead of answering why this project turned into the political equivalent of a burning pile of taxpayer cash, Newsom pivots to his favorite rhetorical trick, self-congratulatory moral posturing. He says, We talk down to people in the Central Valley. We talk past people. That's rich, coming from a man who spent the last decade governing like a coastal elitist king, sipping wine at French Laundry while locking down the state and running middle-class families out of California with his policies. The same man who just moments ago we saw talk down to parents, saying that they don't have control over their own children. I mean, it's insane. 2 seconds apart and everything changes, right? Now, what's more insulting is that he drops a line while literally talking past the question itself. Maher asked him about the failure of the rail system, not whether the people of the Central Valley deserve respect. And notice how Newsom subtly rebrands a $100 billion taxpayer disaster as a connection for rural communities. That's the oldest Democrat trick in the book. When a policy fails, don't explain the failure, just pretend the policy was an act of compassion, and if you oppose it, you're against the people. But let's not forget the facts Newsom conveniently leaves out. This isn't about rural voters being disrespected. It's about the fact that California's high-speed rail project is a monument to bureaucratic incompetence and political grift. By 2019, Newsom himself admitted the project as planned was too expensive and too slow, yet here he is in 2024 still trying to sell the leftover scraps as a victory lap for the forgotten people of the Central Valley. And the cherry on top, Maher's backhanded compliment. You play this game well. Translation, you're really good at dodging accountability while making it sound like a sermon on empathy. That's the entire Democrat playbook in one sentence. Create the mess, waste the money, fail the people, then gaslight everyone by pretending you care more than the critics. What Newsom did here wasn't leadership. It was a masterclass in elite, smug, manipulative nonsense, hijacking a conversation about gross political failure and turning it into a self-serving lecture on respect. The only thing he connected in that interview was his ego to his talking points, while the taxpayers who funded his vanity project are still waiting at the station.
Given that we are in this dire situation, I feel like we don't have time anymore for the old bullshit. You know, the old, are you running for president? Well, you know, there's an exploratory committee and I'm looking at it. I'm happy with my job as governor. I mean, your future is not in California. Your future is in Iowa. Let's dispense with the bullshit. We need someone who's going to be the champion. Are you going to do it or not? Just come on. Tell us. We don't have time for the bullshit.
No, by the way, I deeply respect that. I can't stand the bullshit as well. And I mean that. So look, but this is not my purpose or passion. It's not my meaning. It's not everything.
Right.
The cynicism that's out there, that every move he's making is some move to some longer-term strategy or short-term strategy.
Just that you're a guy who could do it, who could get it done, who could win.
I deeply respect that. I respect the question, but I don't have any grand plans as it respects to that. I'm trying to do the best I can. I'm also trying to be accountable. By the way, you want things to change, you got to change. And that's what the podcast is about. That's my recognition of where we're weak.
Can I do
You
it?
got to call balls and strikes.
What we just witnessed wasn't an interview. It was a pathetic, soft-handed infomercial disguised as journalism, with Bill Maher practically groveling at Gavin Newsom's feet, begging him to run for president like a man trying to will his own savior into existence. And the only thing more embarrassing than Maher's desperate fanboy routine is Newsom's smug, performative denial, the worst kept secret in American politics. And let's break this charade down. Maher pleads with Newsom to just come on, tell us whether he's running, and what does Newsom do? He leans on the classic insufferable politician's dodge. It's not my purpose or passion. I have no grand plans. Give us a break. This is the same guy who's been touring red states, doing media circuits, and positioning himself as the anti-DeSantis for the last 2 years. He's out here debating Ron DeSantis on national TV, running ads in Florida, launching podcasts, and flying to China for photo ops. But sure, Gavin, you're just a humble public servant with no grand plans. This is what's known as a strategic false denial. It's a deliberate attempt to feign disinterest while laying the groundwork for a future campaign. It's a political theater, plain and simple, and Maher plays right into it, feeding him softball praise like, you're a guy who could do it. It's laughable. It's not journalism. It's mutual back-scratching between two coastal elites who think you're too stupid to see the game they're playing. Then there's a rhetorical sleight of hand. Newsom tries to position himself as a guy who can't stand the bullshit while simultaneously dishing out the most transparently packaged political nonsense imaginable. He wants credit for being authentic while speaking in rehearsed talking points. It's the same trick he pulled when he refused to answer for California's train wreck of a high-speed rail project or his disastrous COVID lockdown hypocrisy. Smile, deflect, project, fake humility, and hope hope nobody notices the trail of broken promises and failed policies behind him. And let's be clear, if Newsom truly had no presidential ambitions, he wouldn't be publishing op-eds in national outlets, appearing on every mainstream media platform, and engaging in culture war battles outside of his own state. That's not a governor doing his job. That's a man running a shadow primary without filing the paperwork. The biggest insult here is how stupid they think you are. Newsom wants to keep the charade because the second he openly admits he's running, he's accountable to a new level of public scrutiny, and he doesn't want that heat yet. Maher, meanwhile, is happy to play the useful idiot, propping him up without ever pressing him on his record. The mass exodus out of California, the rising crime, the crumbling infrastructure, the homelessness epidemic, the highest poverty rate in the country, the education system paying through the gills per student, and underperforming in every metric, all under Newsom's watch. So let's dispense with the real bullshit. Gavin Newsom is running for president. He's been running since the day he survived the recall. And every word of this interview was a carefully staged audition designed to manufacture the illusion of reluctance while laying the groundwork for the inevitable. The only thing worse than this scam is just how painfully obvious it is. So here's a question you should be asking yourself right now. How many times are you going to let these people lie to your face and call it leadership? How many times will you watch them set the fire, sell you the extinguisher, and then pat themselves on the back for showing up after the smoke clears? This isn't about Newsom or Maher. It's about a political class that thrives on talking down to you while pretending they're on your side. The same people who tell you they're protecting you are the ones stripping you of agency, hollowing out your communities, and rewriting failure as progress. So the next time you hear them sermonize about respect and authenticity, ask yourself, who benefits from this narrative? Who's cashing the check while you're left paying the bill? Because if you're not questioning it, you're the product, and they're banking on you never waking up to that fact. You tell me what you think in the comments down below. Have a terrific day. Peace.